You need to understand the stakes here,
I'm listening.
but I'm not convinced. You want to compete with this old car? This is unacceptable!
I won't be judged by you or anyone else.
People are watching!
A billionaire mocked a black woman's old car. He laughed at her car. He mocked her in front of his rich friends. He bet his entire fortune to humiliate her. But when the race started, he realized he wasn't up against a mechanic. He was up against a legend. Who do you think wins? Drop Sandra or Richard in the comments. Subscribe for the next twist. The sun hung lazily over the sprawling hills of Belmont Ridge, warming the cream-colored mansion that sat like a throne at the top of the gated estate. The driveway was paved in hand-laid Italian stone, polished so meticulously that even tire marks looked like insults. Luxury cars, sleek, polished, museum-worthy, lined the circular driveway like trophies waiting to be admired. Sandra Wilcox had seen places like this before. She just rarely had a reason to drive into them. Her rusted 1978 Datsun groaned as it climbed the final slope, its engine humming with a deep, confident growl that didn't match the worn exterior. The hood carried spots of faded blue paint. The right fender still bore a dent from a 2005 street race she'd won, and the bumper was held together with bolts she'd forged herself. To anyone else, it looked like scrap metal still pretending to be a car. To her, it was memory, legacy, life. She pulled into the circular driveway slowly, knowing full well the scene she was interrupting. Richard Moore's elite private networking party, one of those gatherings where CEOs competed silently to prove who was more important, who had more influence, who had the newer, shinier toy. Sandra parked her Datsun right beside the biggest toy of all, a white Italian hypercar, worth more than every home on her block combined. Her door creaked as she pushed it open. The sound sliced through the murmuring crowd. Heads turned. Laughter began like a spark. Quick, flickering, then spread into uproarious amusement. What the hell is that? Did someone order maintenance? Why would security let that thing in here? Sandra stepped out wearing navy joggers, a simple white shirt, and old sneakers. Her braided hair fell over one shoulder, her posture straight, steady. She didn't shrink. She never did. She walked around to her trunk, lifted it, and pulled out a padded box containing the custom carburetor she had delivered for a private restoration project. She had one job: drop it off, get her check, leave quietly. That changed the moment he noticed her. Richard Moore turned as if he sensed something beneath him, a disturbance, an inconvenience. 6 feet tall, gym-polished, jaws sharp enough to slice marble, skin tan from yacht seasons in the Mediterranean. His tailored navy suit hugged him like it adored his body more than any woman ever had. A crystal glass of scotch rested lazily in his hand. He saw Sandra, and more importantly, he saw her Datsun, and he erupted into booming laughter. Whoa-ho-ho! What is that? His friends followed his gaze, eyes popping, jaws falling open before they burst into snickering laughter. Sandra calmly closed her trunk. She didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the house staff, members she was supposed to deliver the package to. But Richard wasn't done. He stepped toward her with theatrical swagger, pointing at the Datsun like he'd discovered a zoo animal on his driveway. No. Seriously, who let this junkyard donation through the gate? His friends howled. Someone pulled out a phone. Another whispered, "This is going online, man." Sandra finally turned, her gaze cold, unbothered. "I'm here to deliver a carburetor," she said evenly. "That's all." "Oh, a delivery girl?" Richard exaggerated the word like an insult. "Sweetheart, this is a private event. You don't need to embarrass yourself by parking that." He waved his glass toward the Datsun, relic next to a real machine. Sandra's expression didn't budge. Her arms moved slowly across her chest, calm, secure, unfazed. But Richard took her silence as weakness. He smirked. "Tell you what, how about we make this fun?" His friends leaned in, sensing the flair of entertainment. "You see this?" Richard gestured to his hypercar. "It's worth more than 10 years of your income." Sandra raised an eyebrow slightly, a movement small but cutting. Richard continued, stepping closer, lowering his voice but making sure the crowd could still hear. How about a little race? A friendly challenge. You versus me. No, thank you, Sandra replied simply. The crowd booed jokingly. Oh, come on. What? Scared? She knows that thing will explode at 60 miles per hour. Richard chuckled loud enough to regain attention. No, no, no. She's not scared, she's realistic. Then he pointed straight at Sandra's car and shouted the words that would destroy his life. Outrun me with that junk car. The state fell silent. Phones lifted high. Some guests gasped, others grinned. Everyone waited for the delivery girl to crumble under the billionaire's humiliation. Sandra didn't. She simply asked, "Why?" Richard blinked. "Why what? Why do you need to prove anything to me?" His face twitched briefly, revealing the insecurity beneath the expensive suit. He stepped forward again, now inches from her face. "Because someone like you shouldn't disrupt NY space without being checked." The crowd murmured. The racism was subtle, but clear. Sandra's jaw clenched, but only for a moment. He smirked. "Come on, race me. Unless that car is just for sentimental purposes." His friends chuckled cruelly. Richard's ego lit like gasoline. "Okay, let's do this. Let's make it interesting." He raised his voice. "I'll bet my entire fortune." The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "Richard, what?" Another yelled, "Man, don't do this." But Richard was drunk on attention, on ego, on the intoxicating belief that Sandra was beneath him. He lifted his glass. "I'm dead serious. I'll wager everything I own, my companies, my properties, my accounts, that I can beat her in a race." Sandra didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Richard's friends circled him. "Bro, you're out of your mind." She might not even say yes. Just drop it. But the billionaire wanted the applause more than the win. "Come on, sweetheart, take the bet," he taunted. "Unless you already know you'll lose." Sandra finally moved. One step forward. Her eyes, sharp and focused, met his directly. "You're betting your entire fortune?" she asked. Richard grinned with arrogant certainty. Every last dollar. Phones recorded every second. Sandra looked at her Datsun, then back at Richard. "Fine," she said, her voice steady, her heartbeat unbothered, her confidence so silent it was unsettling. "I accept." A collective gasp shot through crowd. Richard's jaw dropped slightly, then twisted into a triumphant grin. She accepted. "Oh, this is going to be priceless." Cheers erupted. The billionaire clapped mockingly. "Great. Perfect. I'll have my accountant draft the agreement. But honestly, you'll leave broke and embarrassed before the ink even dries." Sandra responded with the calm of a storm unbothered by noise. "Let the road decide. Would you race if someone insulted your car? Yes or no?" The roar of the crowd, the smell of burning rubber, and the echo of her father's laughter. Sandra Wilcox could still feel it, even now, standing in the quiet of her small garage later that evening. The race wasn't until tomorrow. But the real race, the one that had shaped her entire life, started long before Richard Moore ever learned to spell the word billionaire. She wiped her hands on an old towel and sat on the wooden stool beside her Datsun. It looked tired, aged, forgotten by the world. But the engine beneath its hood, that was her heart and her father's legacy. She closed her eyes and drifted back. "Sandrea, focus on the curve. Don't look at the kids. Look at the road." Her father, Benjamin Wilcox, shouted with playful urgency as he jogged beside her tiny go-kart. Sandra was 9, small, determined. Braids fly behind her like streamers as she sped around a cracked asphalt track. The go-kart rattled, sparks occasionally flickering where metal met metal, but it held, because she had helped rebuild it with her father piece by piece, night after night. He was an engineer, but more importantly, he was a dreamer, a man who believed the world had room for girls like Sandra, fast, brilliant, unstoppable. She took the curve perfectly. Her father hooped, pumping his fist. "That's my girl. You're thinking like a racer now." Sandra giggled as she pulled the cart to a stop and jumped out. Her father lifted her high into the air and spun her around. "You're going to be the greatest driver in this city one day," he whispered into her ear. "And you won't ever need permission from anyone to be amazing." Those words stayed with her. Even years later, especially years later, crowds chanted her name. Ascendiare, Ascendiare, Ascendiare. She was a rising star, winning junior championships, beating boys twice her size, earning headlines like, "The girl who sees the road before it appears." Her father stood at the finish line, tears in his eyes as she crossed first place yet again. That night, they celebrated with homemade pizza and laughter echoing through their little kitchen. It was the last memory she had of him. He died 2 nights later. A heart attack. Sudden. Cruel. Unfair. Sandra skipped her next qualifying race. And the next. Sponsors called. Recruiters begged. Teams offered contracts. She ignored them all. A part of her had died with her father. Without him, racing fell hollow. Sandra opened her eyes, blinking away the sting. She reached inside the Datsun's glove compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her father's hand-drawn blueprint for the engine they had dreamed of building. It was wrinkled from years of unfolding and refolding, stained with oil, taped at the edges. Every modification under the hood came from this single sheet. This Datsun, this rusted piece of scrap that people mocked. It was the final thing she and her father had built together. A tribute, a promise fulfilled. A legacy sealed in steel and gasoline. Now she would race with it one more time. Not for pride, not for attention, but because mocking this car was mocking her father, and that she could never tolerate. Most people didn't know the other half of her story. They didn't know that Sandra spent weekends at the community center mentoring young girls, teaching them how to build engines, repair bikes, race go-karts, and dream without limits. Her garage was small, but her impact was large. Little girls with braids, sneakers, and bright eyes the same age she once was gathered around her every Saturday, calling her, "Miss Sandy, look what I built. Miss Sandy, can I race today? Miss Sandy, you're the coolest." It was the closest thing to her father's legacy being alive again. Every tool she passed them felt like she was passing on his light. None of these kids knew she had once been a champion. She never talked about it. But the confidence she saw in their faces today, the way they believed in themselves, reminded her of the little girl on a go-kart track, chasing a dream with her father running beside her. While Sandra brushed engine grease off her palms and locked her garage, Richard Moore sat in a penthouse bathed in gold lighting, surrounded by excess. Crystal glasses, marble floors, a panoramic view of a city he thought he owned. Richard Moore was the kind of man who used NDAs like coasters, the kind who replaced friends as often as he replaced his cars. His father had been colder than the ice in his $17,000 whiskey. Affection was a currency Richard never received. Approval was something he chased endlessly through wealth, women, and dominance. His obsession with winning wasn't ambition. It was insecurity wrapped in billions. And tonight, as he replayed the moment Sandra accepted his bet, he felt a rush of excitement. But underneath it, something he refused to name. Fear. Because deep down, even he sensed that Sandra Wilcox wasn't normal. Her eyes had held something sharp, unmoving, unsettling. Not arrogance, not pride, confidence, real confidence. The kind that cannot be bought. The kind he didn't understand. He poured another drink, laughed too loudly to no one, and muttered, "She's going to get crushed tomorrow." But even he didn't fully believe it. The garage door creaked open just before midnight. A familiar voice called out, "You seriously went and did it?" Sandra turned. Marcus Reyes, her closest friend and fellow mechanic, stepped inside carrying 2 coffees and a worried expression. He had known Sandra since they were teenagers. He had seen her race. He had seen her break down after her father's death. He knew the look on her face now. "Marcus, I didn't go looking for a fight," she said, tightening a bolt on the chassis. "He insulted my car." Marcus exhaled sharply. "And Sandra, this isn't some local street punk. This is Richard Moore, the most vindictive billionaire in the whole damn city." Sandra smirked faintly. "He challenged me." Marcus threw his hands up. "Exactly. And you know guys like him. He'll do anything to avoid losing. He'll cheat, lie, twist the story. He has a kind of power that ruins people. Sandra wiped sweat from her forehead and looked him dead in the eyes. He won't forget why challenging me was a mistake. There was a cold certainty in her voice. Marcus swallowed. His worry deepened, but so did his admiration. Sandra's presence had always had that effect. She wasn't loud. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't driven by ego. She was driven by purpose, by legacy, by a promise to a father who believed she was destined for greatness. "You're really confident about this?" Marcus whispered. Sandra placed her hand on the Datsun's hood. "I know what this car can do," she said. "And tomorrow, Richard Moore will know too." The engine behind the hood hummed, as if it agreed. Marcus stepped closer. "Sandra, be careful. He won't be racing you tomorrow. He'll be trying to destroy you." Sandra picked up her wrench, tightened the final bolt, and whispered, "He'll try." Then she lifted her eyes, fierce, calm, unstoppable. "But he won't succeed." Team Sandra or Team Richard? Morning came with sharp, golden sunrise that washed over prestigious Kingsford estate. Richard Moore's palace of marble, fountains, and carefully curated wealth. But today, something felt different. Even the air carried tension, anticipation, danger. Word had spread overnight. A billionaire challenged a black woman in a rusted old Datsun, and she accepted. People weren't going to miss this. Dozens and hundreds of spectators spilled across the estate's long brick driveway. Millionaires, influencers, curious neighbors, and people who simply love chaos. Phones were out, cameras rolling, live streams already gaining thousands of views. Some came for entertainment. Some came to witness humiliation. A few came because they recognized the name Wilcox and want to confirm the impossible. 2 cars sat at the center of the circle. On the left, a glossy, ice-white hypercar, Richard Moore's pride. Sleek lines, perfect engineering, a monster under the hood. On the right, a rusted brown Datsun 280Z. Faded paint, dented door, mismatched panels, and a hood that looked like it fought storms and lost. The cars told a story. A shallow one, but stories can lie. Sandra Wilcox leaned over the open hood of her Datsun with quiet focus. Her hands moved with surgical precision as she tightened one last screw, checked the gauge, listened to the faint hum beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Richard Moore stood beside his hypercar like a model in an advertisement, wearing sunglasses indoors and a navy suit that screamed insecurity disguised as power. His friends circled him, laughing loudly. "No way she actually races in that thing." "Bro, you're about to go viral. Humiliate her and enjoy your breakfast." Richard smirked, waving them off like he was above all of it. But inside he was buzzing, pride, alcohol residue, and something darker. Richard snapped his fingers, and a technician wearing Moretech racing overalls stepped forward. "Tell them," Richard barked. The technician stood tall. Mr. Moore's car is a Falcon Astra RSX, 1,420 horsepower, quad-turbo hybrid engine, 0 to 60 in 2.2 seconds. Top speed, 270 miles per hour. "Say it louder," Richard ordered, grinning. The technician obeyed. The crowd murmured in shock. Several phones zoomed in on the hypercar's curves. Richard leaned against it like a king on his throne. "This," he announced dramatically, "is what real power looks like." Cheers erupted, the kind of cheers that are meant to embarrass someone else. Sandra still hadn't looked up. Her hands were steady, her breathing even, her focus absolute. Everything she needed to say was in the engine. Everything she needed to prove would happen on the road. A guest walked by and laughed loudly. "Hey, sweetheart, want me to push-start that thing for you?" Another chimed in. "It belongs in a museum, like one for stuff that doesn't work anymore." No reaction. Sandra just wiped her hands, closed the hood, and gave the metal a gentle tap, almost like it was a living thing, the same way her father used to. A young man wearing a vintage racing jacket squeezed his way through the crowd. He stared at Sandra, then at the Datsun, then back at Sandra. His voice cracked with disbelief. "Hold up. Is that no way? Is that Sandra Wilcox?" Several heads turned. Sandra who? The name sounds familiar. Didn't she used to race? The young man pulled out his phone and started searching frantically. She's not just any racer. She was a legend when she was a teenager. His voice rose as he read aloud from his screen. 3-time national junior champion. Record holder at Eastbrook Circuit. Nicknamed the Curve Whisperer. She disappeared after her dad died. The crowd went silent. A silence of slow realization, of tension shifting. Richard's smile flickered. Just for a moment, he forced a laugh. She raced go-karts. Big deal. But several people stepped closer to Sandra, looking at her with new eyes. That is her. She was insane on the track. My brother raced with her. Said she was the fastest kid he ever saw. And suddenly, the narrative changed. Some spectators now watched Richard like he was a fool. Like he had insulted someone dangerous. Like he had no idea what he was walking into. Sandra reached into her car, adjusted the worn leather seat, and clipped her seatbelt. Her movements were fluid, efficient, unbothered. She didn't need to announce anything. She didn't need to explain who she was. The road would speak for her. A reporter shoved a microphone toward her window. Miss Wilcox, you're going to race Richard Moore today for his entire fortune. Any comment? Sandra wiped a smudge off her dashboard and replied simply. He issued the challenge. I'm here to honor it. No bragging. No theatrics. Just purpose. The crowd leaned in. The tension thickened. Richard strutted toward her car with a swagger meant to intimidate, but it didn't. He placed a hand on the Datsun's roof and tapped it twice. Hey! He yelled loudly enough for the entire state to hear. Everyone turned. Richard smirked, voice dripping with mock sympathy. Try not to break your car in half during the first turn. Laughter exploded from his entourage. Sandra didn't respond. She finished adjusting her mirror, her face blank. Calm. That calmness made Richard visibly frustrated. He tapped the roof harder. You hear me? You're driving a museum piece. You're not even in my league. Sandra finally closed her door. The sound echoed, a clean, crisp click. She rolled down the window, just enough to speak. Her voice was soft, controlled, deadly confident. Worry about your own. The crowd froze. Some gasped, some cheered, some recorded in excitement. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, he felt something he didn't like at all. A tiny flicker of doubt. Engines would ignite soon. The road would decide everything. But one thing was already certain. This was no longer the humiliation Richard expected. This was the start of a war he wasn't prepared for. Sandra stared straight ahead, her eyes focused, her breathing steady. Richard stormed back to his hypercar, rage simmering beneath his polished exterior. The announcers, the crowd, the cameras. Everyone felt it. Something massive was about to happen. Which car wins? The junk Datsun or the Billionaire's hypercar? The wind went quiet. Spectators leaned forward as if gravity itself pulled them toward the starting line. 2 engines. One a polished monster built in a corporate lab. The other a quiet beast forged in a small garage by a girl and her father, prepared to collide in the most unequal race the estate had ever seen. Or so they thought. Sandra Wilcox tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The leather was worn, the stitching frayed, but it fit perfectly in her hands, like fate had carved it for her alone. Across from her, Richard Moore revved his hypercar aggressively. The roar echoed like thunder, bouncing off marble walls and glass windows. Cameras swiveled, phones lifted, live streams exploded. Everyone was ready for a show, but no one was ready for this show. A staff member, now unofficial referee, lifted a hand. Drivers ready? Richard winked at the cheering crowd, arrogance dripping like oil. Sandra's only response was a quiet breath. 3. The hypercar growled loudly. Richard wanted the world to hear it. Sandra's Datsun idled softly, steady as a heartbeat. 2. Richard slammed the accelerator, testing the launch control. Sandra's eyes sharpened. 1, go! Richard Moore shot forward like a bullet. His hypercar screeched, tires smoking, exhaust spitting fire. The crowd screamed with excitement. There it is. No chance she keeps up. Look at that startup. She's already losing. 3 seconds into the race, Richard looked into his mirror and laughed loudly. Sandra's junk car was still behind him. Pathetic, he shouted inside the cockpit. I knew it, she's nothing. But he spoke too soon. Way too soon. At the end of the driveway, Sandra downshifted, not because she needed speed, but because she wanted control. Then, roar, the Datsun transformed. The engine screamed with a deep, violent thunder no one expected from a car with rusted doors and mismatched panels. Spectators gasped. Cameras shook. Even Richard's hypercar sensors flickered in surprise. What the hell? Richard muttered. Sandra's Datsun leapt forward with torque explosion, so sharp it nearly lifted the front tires. Sandra didn't just catch up. She erased the distance. 10 meters. 5. 2. Then, with surgical precision learned from racing tracks and childhood lessons, she flew past him. Not swerving. Not flailing. Not struggling. Smooth. Clean. Perfect. The crowd erupted. Oh my God! She overtook him. That speed, what engine is that? No way that's a Datsun. Richard's jaw dropped. His fingers tightened. His pulse skyrocketed. His ego cracked. This can't be happening. He slammed the throttle. His hypercar obeyed instantly, roaring with violent power. But no matter how much he pushed, Sandra stayed ahead, like she wasn't even trying. Halfway down the track, panic overtook arrogance. Richard yanked the wheel too hard. His hypercar drifted wide. Tires screeched. The car fishtailed dangerously close to fountain. Spectators screamed. Watch out! He's losing it. He's going to crash. Richard fought the controls, heart pounding. Meanwhile, Sandra executed her turns with the grace of a dancer. Her Datsun hugged the curves effortlessly, almost like the road bent for her, not the other way around. Every move she made reflected years of muscle memory, her father's teachings, her hidden brilliance. She wasn't just racing, she was remembering. The finish line came into view, a stretch of pavement glowing beneath the morning sun. Richard pushed everything his hypercar had. The dashboard flashed red warnings. The engine strained. But Sandra was already there. The Datsun roared across the line with a triumphant scream. 5 whole seconds. Before Richard even entered the straight. When he finally crossed, late, shaky, humiliated, the crowd was already running towards Sandra. Sandra stopped her car. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply rested her hand on the dashboard and whispered, "We did it, Dad." The crowd flooded around her. Phones inches from her window. Live stream comments exploding. She destroyed him. That wasn't close. She outran a billionaire. Record this. Post it. Everywhere. Richard stumbled out of his hypercar, face red, suit wrinkled, pride shattered. His friends backed away slowly. Nobody wanted to associate with a loser, especially a loud loser. Cameras turned to him, and that made it worse. At least 15 phones had captured the race. A drone above the driveway got the entire overtake in cinematic clarity. The estate security cameras caught it too. He had been beaten, outclassed, embarrassed, by a woman he mocked, by a car he called junk, by a driver he underestimated. He stormed towards Sandra, yelling like a man possessed. This race is void. It doesn't count. You cheated. You did something to your car. This isn't legitimate. Sandra stepped out of the Datsun slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even flinch. She simply stood her ground. Phone cameras captured everything. Live stream viewers spammed comments. And Sandra's silence, her calm, still posture, only made Richard look more unhinged. He pointed at her, face twisted in rage. "I am not giving you anything. You hear me? That bet was a joke. A joke." The crowd murmured. A joke? Everyone heard him. Everyone recorded him. Sandra tilted her head slightly, but she said nothing, because the truth was already burning through the air. Richard Moore had just destroyed himself. Richard's voice cracked as he yelled again. This race is void. Void. IT doesn't count. He didn't realize that behind him, 3 people had already uploaded the race online. The video was spreading like wildfire. His own words, "Outrun me with that junk car," had become a meme. Sandra quietly opened her car door, leaned inside, and grabbed her father's blueprint. She looked at Richard, not with anger, but with certainty. This wasn't over. Not even close. Did Richard deserve that loss? The celebration around Sandra's victory lasted barely 2 minutes. Because the moment Richard Moore realized the cameras weren't turning away, that the world wasn't laughing with him anymore, but at him, something inside him snapped. His humiliation twisted itself into rage. Rage sharpened itself into entitlement. And entitlement became vengeance. Richard jabbed a finger at 2 of his private security guards, massive men in black tactical gear. "Detain her," he barked. The guards hesitated. They weren't sure if this was legal. They weren't even sure if they wanted to get involved. But Richard screamed louder. "Now, before she leaves." The guards turned reluctantly and began walking towards Sandra. The crowd fell into a tense hush. Sandra tightened the grip on her father's blueprint, eyes narrowing slightly. "I wouldn't do that," a man in the crowd muttered toward the guards. "She didn't do anything wrong." Another voice chimed in. "Yo, this is all on camera. Don't touch her." Richard snapped. "Shut up, all of you. This is MY Estate. My race. My rules." The guards reached Sandra. "Ma'am," one said awkwardly, "we're being instructed to—" Sandra cut him off with a raised hand. "No one touches me." Her calmness was sharper than any threat. Her eyes were steady, unblinking. The guards stepped back instinctively. They weren't afraid of her physically. They were afraid of being recorded manhandling an innocent black woman in front of 200 witnesses and 1,000 phones. Richard screamed again. "Are you useless? I said detain her." But the guard stood still. And for the first time in his privileged life, Richard Moore felt powerless. If security wouldn't obey him, someone else would. Richard pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "She coerced me," he shouted immediately. "She forced me into a dangerous bet. I'm being extorted." The crowd gasped. "Oh, he's really calling the cops?" "He's lying right to the dispatcher. This man has no shame." Richard paced up and down the driveway like a child throwing a tantrum. "She tricked me. She baited me. She manipulated me into putting my fortune at risk." Except everyone had heard the truth. Everyone had seen the truth. And everyone had recorded the truth. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars rolled up the estate drive. Officers stepped out, scanning the crowd. Richard rushed toward them, pointing wildly at Sandra. "Arrest her. She coerced me into a fraudulent wager, extortion, entrapment, financial manipulation. She tried to humiliate me." The officers raised eyebrows. One asked, "Sir, do you have any evidence of this?" Richard exploded. "Of course I do. Everyone saw it." An officer turned to the crowd. "Did anyone witness coercion?" A wave of laughter rippled through the spectators. Then, one by one, phones lifted. Screens played the exact moment Richard shouted, "Outrun me with that junk car. I'll bet my entire fortune on it." Richard's face drained of color. Another video played. "You leave broke and embarrassed." A third, "I'm betting everything. Let's race." A fourth, "You heard me. My entire fortune, if you can beat me." Richard sputtered like a malfunctioning engine. They're out of context. She manipulated the situation. She. One officer held up a hand. "Sir, this footage seems very clear." Another officer approached Sandra. "Ma'am, from what we see, you haven't committed a crime. Are you okay?" Sandra nodded. "I'm fine. Just trying to leave." The officer gave her a respectful nod. "You're free to go. You won the race fair and square." The crowd cheered. Richard's face twisted in disbelief. The moment the officer stepped away, Richard lunged forward. Not physically, but verbally, like a rabid animal backed into a corner. "You think you won?" he hissed at Sandra. "You think a stupid race means anything?" She didn't answer. That only enraged him more. "I'll bury you," he roared. I'll sue you for every penny you've ever earned. The insults came like bullets. I'll drag you through court for years, bankrupt you. I'll destroy your reputation. I'll file defamation, harassment, coercion, everything I can. But Sandra didn't flinch. Her silence made Richard look like a fool fighting his own reflection. You hear me? He screamed. I'm Richard Moore. I crush people like you. A woman near the front shouted, Bro, you lost. Stop crying. Another voice chimed in. She beat you fair and square. Phones captured every second. Richard's tantrum was already going viral. She finally turned her back on Richard and walked toward her Datsun. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she knew was coming. This wasn't over. Not even close. Men like Richard never backed down. Not after humiliation. Not after losing control. Not after losing face. Marcus, still shaking, rushed to her side. Sandra, you okay? She nodded faintly. Yeah, just tired. You know he's going to come after you, right? He whispered. She gazed at the blueprint in her hand. Her father's legacy. Her anchor. I know. As she slid into her driver's seat, her phone buzzed violently. A notification flashed across the screen. Richard Moore's lawyer. Cease and desist letter draft. Lawsuit intent. Defamation, coercion, mental distress, emotional damages. Sandra exhaled slowly. He wasted no time. But before the panic could settle in, another message popped up, this one from an unknown number. She opened it. A link and a message. Sandra, you need to see what Richard did to others before you. A reporter, a whistleblower, someone who had been waiting for the right moment. Sandra stared at the message as her engine rumbled softly beneath her. Richard hadn't just wronged her. He'd wronged others. Many others. And now, she was about to find out exactly how deep his darkness went. Should Sandra walk away or fight back? Sandra sat in her car for nearly a full minute, staring at the message on her phone. Sandra, you need to see what Richard did others before you. Attached was a link, one that seemed to vibrate with hidden weight. She clicked it. A web page opened. A breaking news headline lit the screen. Billionaire Richard Moore faces new scrutiny after public outbursts. Below it, photos, interviews, leaked files, whistleblower statements. Sandra blinked. This was no gossip piece. This was an investigation. And it was just the beginning. Within hours, every major news outlet picked up the story. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, local stations, racing forums, tech blogs, women's advocacy groups, civil rights organizations. Everyone. At first, it was just clips of Richard's tantrum from the racetrack. His shouting. His meltdown. His attempt to call the police with a fabricated accusation. But then, a journalist posted something no one expected. Here is what Richard Moore has been hiding for 14 years. The article hit social media like a lightning strike. Millions read it. And Sandra's breath caught in her throat. The journalist, Amar Blake, a respected investigative reporter, had spent years trying to expose Richard Moore. Now, thanks to Sandra's race going viral, she finally had the world's attention. Her report began with a chilling line. Richard Moore has built an empire of silence, fear, and manipulation. Today, that wall finally cracks. Then came the revelations, one after another. 1. Racial discrimination complaints. 7 former employees, Black, Hispanic, Asian, filed reports against Richard. Not one complaint ever saw a courtroom. Not one complainant was ever heard again. Because Moore-Tecca's legal team used forced NDAs and payouts to bury the accusations. A quote from an anonymous employee chilled readers. He uses money like a weapon. He destroys people who speak up. Sandra clenched her jaw. She could already feel the storm forming. 2. Assault allegations. 3 women had filed assault reports between 2015 and 2021. All disappeared quickly. All sealed. All settled out of court. One woman wrote anonymously, I wasn't fighting a man, I was fighting his billions. Sandra closed her eyes. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't arrogance. This was rot. 3. Workplace abuse and intimidation. Richard's leadership style was described by former staff as tyrannical, volatile, vindictive, psychologically abusive. One manager testified that Richard threatened to blacklist him from the entire tech industry because he disagreed with him in a meeting. Another wrote, "He told me, 'I will ruin your life if you embarrass me.' I believed him." Sandra exhaled slowly. She had believed she was dealing with a narcissist. But this was far worse. 4. NDAs used as weapons. The article highlighted dozens of legally binding non-disclosure agreements used to silence employees, partners, contractors, women whistleblowers. One clause stood out. Individuals were forbidden from speaking about any interaction with Richard Moore for 40 years. 40 years. Sandra whispered to herself. Who does that? Only one kind of person. A man who feared the truth. Then came the twist Sandra never expected. Scrolling down, she found a section titled, "The Untold Victim, Benjamin Wilcox." Sandra froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She whispered, barely audible, "Dad?" Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. Her father's photo, the one she kept framed above her workbench, appeared on the screen. Next to it, a younger Richard Moore's father, Theodore Moore. Her breath caught. The article revealed Benjamin Wilcox was a senior mechanical engineer at Moortech 28 years ago. He designed a revolutionary microfuel system that could have changed automobile efficiency worldwide. Theodore Moore stole the concept and presented it as his own. When Benjamin confronted him, he was fired, blacklisted, labeled as unstable by Moortech's legal team, denied credit, denied severance, denied his career. The paragraph ended with, Benjamin Wilcox never recovered from this injustice. His daughter, Sandra, inherited his brilliance and his wounds. Sandra covered her mouth. Tears burned behind her eyes. All these years, she believed her father simply had bad luck. All these years, she had blamed herself for not helping enough. All these years, she thought his downfall was random. But it wasn't random. It was engineered. By the Moore family. Sandra whispered, trembling, "This feud didn't start yesterday. It started before I was even born." Her old Datsun, the engine she rebuilt using her father's sketches, the car that carried her through the race. It wasn't just a tribute. It was justice waiting for its moment. And finally, that moment had come. Hashtags exploded across the internet. Hashtag expose Richard Moore. Hashtag justice for Wilcox. Hashtag Sandra was right. Hashtag Datsun versus Billionaire. Hashtag more tech leaks. Within 24 hours, Moore tech stock dropped 17%. Sponsors froze contracts. 2 board members resigned publicly. Civil rights organizations announced investigations. Former employees came forward with new claims. Viral videos of the race hit 120+ million views. It was no longer a story. It was a movement. And Sandra Wilcox, the woman Richard mocked, had become the symbol of everything he tried to destroy. But the biggest shock of all came next. Sandra's phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A deep, confident, steady voice spoke. "Miss Wilcox." "Yes." "My name is Attorney Jalen Rivers. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I saw what happened to you today. I've read everything about your father." Sandra tightened her grip on the phone. I'm still trying to process all this." Rivers replied, "You don't need to process anything alone." A pause. Then, "I'll take your case. Pro bono. And we'll win." Sandra's throat tightened. This was no small offer. Jalen Rivers was a legend. The kind of attorney billionaires feared. The kind who made systemic injustice crumble. She swallowed hard. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because," Rivers said, "the Moores crushed your father, and now they're trying to crush you. But they didn't expect that the person they underestimated would be the one to finally expose them." Sandra closed her eyes. The fight ahead would be brutal. But she wasn't alone anymore. Should Richard be exposed publicly? Yes or a no? The race was only the beginning. Now, Sandra stood outside a glass-walled arbitration center. The kind of place built for billionaires to quietly settle disputes without public trials. Cold marble, chrome steel, security guards everywhere. Silence thick enough to choke on. But what hung heavier than the silence was the law itself. Today, the bet Richard Moore made in arrogance would face judgment. Sandra inhaled deeply. She wasn't dressed like a billionaire challenger. No tailored suit, no expensive jewelry. She wore a simple navy blouse, black slacks, and braided hair pulled back neatly. She looked like herself. Behind her stood Attorney Jalen Rivers, the civil rights powerhouse whose courtroom victories filled textbooks. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just fighting for yourself today," Rivers said softly. "You're fighting for your father, for every person he hurt." Sandra nodded, steadying her breath. Across the hall, Richard Moore exited a limousine flanked by 4 attorneys, each wearing tailored suits worth more than most houses. He smirked when he saw Sandra, whispering loudly to his legal team, "Let's finish this woman." But for the first time, his smirk didn't match his eyes. There was fear there. He knew he wasn't walking into a negotiation. He was walking into his reckoning. The room was clinical and cold. 3 arbitrators sat behind a long desk. A court reporter typed steadily. Witnesses filed into rows. Richard sat with his army of attorneys, confident, arrogant, ready to dominate through money and intimidation. Sandra sat with Rivers, calm, composed, anchored. The lead arbitrator called. This arbitration concerns a verbal financial wager made publicly and recorded in multiple video sources. Both parties please present. Richard's lead attorney stood immediately. "Your Honors, my client never intended a binding contract. It was a spontaneous joke." Rivers interrupted smoothly. "Play the first video." The screen lit up. Richard's voice boomed through the speakers. "Outrun me with that junk car. I'll bet you my entire fortune, everything I own." "You heard me. My entire fortune." The room went dead still. Richard's face turned pale. His attorney stammered. Those statements were made under emotional distress. They were not meant as contractual commitments. This woman manipulated the situation. Rivers rose slowly. "Let's examine all angles." He proceeded to play 8 more videos, one after another. High-angle drone footage, a guest live stream, 2 security cameras, a party guest selfie video capturing Richard shouting, a bystander's recording with clear audio, a slow-motion clip showing Sandra's acceptance. Each one contained the same words. "My entire fortune. Everything I own." This is a real bet. The arbitrators whispered among themselves. Richard swallowed hard. 1, a party guest. The guest testified nervously. He wasn't joking. He was showing off. We all saw it. 2, the racing technician. "I confirmed the terms twice with Mr. Moore. He said it very clearly." 3, a security guard. "He told us to detain her after she won. It felt like retaliation." 4, a police officer who responded. "Based on all video evidence, she did not coerce him. He made the statements voluntarily." Richard's attorney tried to poke holes, but there were none. Every witness, every camera, every moment told the same story. Richard Moore lost. Fairly, openly, publicly. And the law saw everything. Near the end of the hearing, Richard stood up, slamming his palms on the table. "This is ridiculous. She cheated. Her car is illegal. She pressured me. This whole thing is a scam." Rivers didn't flinch. "Mr. Moore, you accused her of coercion, defamation, manipulation, yet not a single witness supports your claims." Richard's voice cracked. "She embarrassed me. On camera, she humiliated me." Rivers stepped forward. "Humiliation is not grounds to void a contract. Arrogance is not a legal defense. And your pride is not this court's concern." The room murmured. Even the arbitrators had tiny smirks. Richard sank back into his seat, breathing hard. He looked smaller, crushed, exposed. Rivers walked toward the center of the room. Calm, powerful, unshakable. He spoke with controlled fire. "Your Honors, this case is not complicated. A wealthy man made a wager out of ego. He shouted it publicly. He confirmed it multiple times. It was recorded from every angle. He set the terms. She merely accepted. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And now, because he lost, he wants to erase his own agreement. Rivers turned deliberately toward Richard. This arbitration isn't about cars. It's about power. It's about whether a billionaire can escape the consequences of his own arrogance. Then he stepped back, voice steady. We ask that the bet be honored. In full. The room buzzed with anticipation. Richard jumped up once more, desperate. This can't happen. Do you know who I am? Do you know what losing this company will do? It's my legacy, my world. The lead arbitrator leaned forward. Mr. Moore, perhaps that is something you should have considered before making the wager. Richard collapsed back into his chair, sweating, shaking, defeated. The arbitrators exchanged brief notes. Then, the lead arbitrator fixed Richard with a gaze so sharp it sliced through the room's tension. Mr. Moore, he said. Everyone held their breath. Sandra's pulse pounded in her ears. Rivers sat perfectly still. The arbitrator continued. A contract is a contract. Silence. The fate of a billionaire hung in the air. Who wins the case? Sandra or Richard? The arbitration chamber was so still it felt carved from ice. Richard Moore sat trembling, his fingers digging crescent-shaped marks into the leather armrests. His attorneys whispered frantically, but none of their words could save him now. The lead arbitrator lifted the final ruling. Mr. Moore, he said, voice calm but merciless. You entered a verbal contract witnessed by hundreds and recorded from multiple angles. The contract is valid. You must transfer every asset stated in the wager to Ms. Sandra Wilcox immediately. Silence. Then Richard's world cracked. No, he whispered, shaking his head. You can't do this. This is MY Company, my empire. I built all of this. Rivers leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but sharp as a blade. That's what happens when arrogance drives the wheel. Richard shot to his feet, like a man drowning. I will not sign. Do you hear me? I refuse. Security stepped forward. The arbitrator didn't blink. Mr. Moore, refusal will initiate forced liquidation and criminal charges for contract repudiation. Richard froze. Criminal charges. Jail time. His pulse stuttered. His breath broke. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself back into the chair. A pen was placed in front of him. A single line waited for his signature, the line that would erase the Moore empire from his hands forever. His hand shook violently. For a moment, he almost convinced himself he still had power. But power built on ego collapses faster than glass. He signed. A broken, trembling scribble. Sandra didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply watched him with quiet, steady eyes, the same eyes she had on the racetrack. The same eyes that destroyed him without a single insult. The deed was done. Richard Moore was no longer Richard Moore, billionaire CEO. He was now Richard Moore, a man stripped of everything but the clothes on his back and the ghosts of his choices. The news hit the world like an earthquake. Breaking. Billionaire loses entire fortune in legally bound race bet. More tech stock in freefall. Minus 29% and dropping. Sponsors pull out after leaked abuse reports. Board issues emergency statement. Within hours, more tech shares crashed so fast the stock exchange temporarily halted trading. 3 major corporate partners publicly severed ties. Influencers, journalists, and former employees flooded social media with stories of abuse. Investors demanded immediate leadership change to restore public trust. By evening, Richard received a message he feared most. A formal notice from his board. You are hereby removed from the position of CEO, effective immediately. They didn't even offer a severance package. When he arrived at Moretech headquarters to plead his case, security wouldn't even let him into the lobby. The company he once ruled with an iron fist now treated him like a stranger. Luxury brands that once begged to be associated with him now posted statements. Moore no longer aligns with our values. We condemn abusive practices in leadership. We support accountability and transparency. Every door he once walked through proudly now slammed in his face. Online, his humiliation became global entertainment. The race. The scream, the meltdown, the 911 call, the investigation leaks, his removal from the board. It all played on repeat, and each replay carved another piece out of him. Reporters camped outside his former penthouse. Helicopters hovered. Old friends stopped answering his calls. The empire built on intimidation finally collapsed under the weight of truth. Late that night, alone in a barren guest house he once used for storage, Richard stood in front of a dusty mirror. No designer suit, no boardroom, no entourage, no applause, just a man stripped bare by his own ego. His reflection looked older, smaller, weaker. He leaned closer to the mirror, eyes bloodshot, voice cracking. "How?" he whispered. "How did she beat me?" His breath fogged the glass. He pressed his forehead against the mirror, shaking. How did someone like her take everything from someone like me? But deep down, beneath the bruised pride and collapsing arrogance, he knew the real answer. Sandra didn't take anything from him. He handed it to her the moment he underestimated her. Did Richard deserve to lose everything? Yes or no? From ashes to acceleration. For the first time in weeks, the world wasn't talking about Richard Moore. They were talking about her. Sandra Wilcox, the woman who outran a billionaire, the daughter of a genius engineer, the racer who vanished and then returned like a storm. But fame wasn't her goal. Legacy was. Change was. Justice was. And now, she finally had the power to do what her father never could. The building once branded with the towering silver Mortec logo was stripped clean within a week. A new emblem was raised in its place. Wilcox Motors Initiative, a simple black and gold crest shaped like an engine ignition. Crowds gathered as the cloth dropped. Cameras flashed. Former Mortec employees stood silently, some with tears in their eyes. Sandra stood on the steps, wearing a dark blazer, braids flowing, eyes bright with purpose. She didn't smile arrogantly. She didn't gloat. She stood tall, steady, becoming the woman her father always believed she would be. At the press conference, she spoke softly, but her words cracked the air open. This company will no longer silence genius. It will amplify it. Applause erupted like thunder. The next morning, Sandra held her first board meeting. Except this time, no entitled billionaires, no corporate manipulators, no snakes in expensive suits. Instead, 10 women engineers with resumes the world had ignored, 6 black automotive prodigies who had been rejected from major firms for young talents under 21, including girls from her community racing club, a team of historians and mechanics specializing in vintage engines, a single empty chair for her father, left intentionally, silently honored. Sandra looked around the table. "This is the future of engineering," she said, and she meant every syllable. Her first executive order? Effective immediately, we are fully funding community-based engineering and racing programs, especially for young girls. Her second? No employee will ever be silenced by NDAs. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. For the first time, the company felt alive. Human. Free. Within a month, the Wilcox Motors Initiative launched a citywide announcement. Free engineering scholarships for girls age 8 to 16, full sponsorship for community kart racing teams, internships for students in low-income communities. When Sandra arrived at the community center one Saturday, the kids swarmed her. "Miss Sandy, you're on TV everywhere. Did you really beat a billionaire? Can we visit your new company building? Are we getting new racing gear?" Sandra laughed, a real, warm laugh she hadn't felt in years. "Yes," she told them, "you're getting everything you deserve." They cheered so loudly the neighbors came outside. Little girls stood taller that day. Little boys watched proudly. And somewhere in the noise, the ghost of her father seemed to smile. 2 weeks later, after endless interviews, board meetings, and restructuring efforts, Sandra finally made the trip she'd been avoiding for years. The cemetery was quiet, draped in soft morning fog. She walked slowly toward the grave marked, "Benjamin Wilcox, beloved father, unrecognized genius." A bouquet of engine blue flowers rested in her hands. She knelt. Her voice shook, not with weakness, but release. "Dad, I did it. They tried to bury your work. They tried to silence you. They tried to erase your brilliance. But now your name is on a building. Your engine will power a new generation. Your daughter, she paused, swallowing emotion. Your daughter finally brought the truth into the light. A tear slid down her cheek. Not grief, gratitude. I'll carry your legacy, she whispered. I promise. The wind brushed her braids gently, as if answering back. When she returned home, a small envelope sat on her doorstep. No name, no stamp, just one line written in neat handwriting. For Sandra Wilcox, about Richard. Inside was a single folded page. She opened it. Her eyes skimmed over the first line. There's something you still don't know about Richard. Her entire body tensed. The signature at the bottom stunned her. Amanda Hale, former assistant to Richard Moore. Sandra stared at the letter. A shadow crossed her expression. The rise wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Is Sandra a hero? Comment yes if she inspired you. The Moore estate didn't shine the way it used to. The marble fountains were dry. The hedges untrimmed. The long driveway once filled with supercars now sat quiet, almost abandoned. Months had passed since the race that shattered Richard's empire. Months since Sandra reshaped the industry with the Wilcox Motors Initiative. And today, she returned, not as a challenger, not as a mechanic, not as a humiliated delivery girl he once mocked. Today, she arrived as the CEO of the largest tech engineering employer in the region, the woman transforming the future of transportation, the leader thousands now admired. Her Datsun rolled slowly up the driveway, restored, repainted, rebuilt with the world watching. The once rusted panels gleamed metallic midnight blue. The engine purred like thunder wrapped in velvet. It didn't look like a relic anymore. It looked like royalty. As she parked, two former Mortec security guards, now Wilcox Motors employees, opened the gates for her respectfully. Sandra stepped out, standing tall beneath the sun. She didn't come here for revenge. She came for closure. Richard Moore watched her from a second-floor window. He didn't hide. He didn't move. He simply stared, thin, unshaven, and ghost pale. He barely recognized himself anymore. His suits were gone. His penthouse sold. His company dismantled and rebuilt without him. The world didn't call him visionary anymore. Just the billionaire who got outrun. And every night, he replayed that race. The moment she passed him. The moment he lost control. The moment the world stopped laughing at her and started laughing at him. And worst of all, her eyes. Calm, focused, unshakable. The look of someone he could never break. He had torn down empires with less than a glance. But that day, she looked right through him. And he had been falling ever since. The front door creaked open. Richard stepped out onto the balcony. Slow, unsure, breathing heavily. Sandra didn't look up. She walked across the driveway with the quiet grace of a woman who had rebuilt her life from ashes. Her heels clicked gently against a stone, echoes of power he no longer possessed. Richard swallowed. Hey, he called, voice cracking. Sandra didn't stop walking. He tried again, louder. Sandra, wait. She paused. Not for him. For herself. A small, final act of mercy. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her profile. He looked broken. Small. A man stripped of everything but regret. His lips trembled. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. You have to believe me, I didn't think. Sandra kept her gaze forward. Her voice was steady. Sharp. Final. You didn't think. That was a problem. Richard's breath shuddered. She walked again, slow, confident, unstoppable. He grasped the railing weakly. Sandra, please, I just want to know. His voice dropped to a painful whisper. How did you beat me? Sandra stopped, turned fully this time. Her eyes met his with the calm certainty of someone who no longer carried anger, only truth. You never lost my car, she said. You lost the girl you underestimated. A single tear slid down Richard's cheek. Then she turned her back to him forever and walked away. No gloating, no insults, no victory speech. Just quiet power. The kind a broken billionaire couldn't outrun. As the gates closed behind her, the camera of fate captured the last image. Richard Moore standing alone on his balcony, defeated, forgotten, haunted by the very woman he mocked. And the narration settled over the scene like the closing line of a legend. He mocked the girl with the old car, but the woman behind the wheel he could never outrun. Which story should we write next? Drop your idea below. Like, share, and subscribe for the next billionaire downfall.